Hello, everybody, and welcome to our town hall this evening. We're welcoming our current students, newly admitted students, and parents. And to get things started this evening, I will pass things over to President Kalin.
Hi, I am happy to welcome all of you again to the next in our webinar series. I can just say that we're continuing to work really hard to develop our plans for the fall. We have first and foremost the concern of safety for our community. It's absolutely our primary concern. And of course, providing a meaningful educational experience is a very close second. But we know that that can't happen unless the community is safe. So we're viewing those two things as in very close tandem. We sent out an update last week, and our purpose tonight is to answer any questions and follow up to that communication. We will actually be sending another update next week. As I said, there's just a lot of work going on and a lot of things that are being developed even as we speak. And so we're happy to answer your questions tonight, ones that were submitted in advance, and then any questions that you submit in the chat tonight as time permits. And we will continue to be in touch as we go forward with this. So with that, I'll turn it back to Nick.
All right. Thank you, President Kalin. As we may have mentioned earlier, tonight we're really going to focus on the Q&A questions that have been coming in over email and also through the chat tonight. At the bottom of your screen is a button that you can press to submit questions for this evening, and we'll get to as many as we can. I do want to express our support for our international students and also our students and families where COVID cases are surging. We know these are incredibly challenging times, and our hearts are with you, and we're doing everything we can on our end to support you from afar and to prepare for your arrival when you arrive. As a reminder, we'll post a copy of the video on the NEC Resource Center page, so if you have any family members that aren't able to be with us this evening, you can go again to the Resource Center page and get a copy of the video this evening. So we're going to start with a couple of questions around academics and the curriculum. And so for these, I'll turn to Provost Novak. First one coming in here. How can students participate in ensembles if they need to complete the semester online, especially asynchronously?
Very good, thank you, Nick. I'll just add my own welcome to you as well, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. It's a great question, and I should say I'm going to kind of begin my answer by just mentioning a word of thanks to everybody who completed the intent form that was Student Services sent out last week. We are really doing our best to assess really what are our students' plans, either to be in person or online. So many thanks to those of you who completed that form. That actually is going to be a very key point of information when we are thinking about ensemble participation and ensemble alternatives, maybe I should say, when it comes to online, those who are going to be participating solely online. I've had some really good active conversations with our faculty about options for students who will not be here in Boston, who still can, we're finding ways of how they can participate in some way. Those are still being formulated, but really will be the final piece of information really will be knowing the balance of students who will be here in person versus online, and then we can really formulate a final plan. We're fully intending on having that announced at the next update that President Kalin mentioned towards the end of next week.
All right, the second question here, will ensembles have a mix of in-person and online participants, and what would that look like?
Right, so this is, might be inferred from my last answer, the balance of in-person here in Boston and then also online will really help inform that, that answer. By and large, I think it seems that it would be much more effective to have groups that are either, this is for small groups especially, either all in person or all online. But again, we'll really make the final determination of this once we have that information of really who will be here. and who will be joining us from afar online. So again, that will be coming at the end of next week.
Right, and as a follow-up question, while students are in self-quarantine, will they have access to their classes and lessons?
Yes, the short answer is yes, they absolutely will. Once the semester begins officially on the 9th of September, classes will be offered and at a prescribed time, and that schedule now is on the website. And so yes, students can, even if they're in self-quarantine, they'll have access to the courses, via online. And again, their teachers are prepared to meet with them online as well. So they really will have, and they can, of course, they can practice in their rooms if they're living in their residence hall. It's another benefit. So they won't miss out on anything if they're during their self-quarantine, if the classes have begun.
Thank you, Tom. So we've got a couple of questions here about, I'll phrase these as daily life and sort of logistical questions. So one of these is about traveling to Boston and asking the question, I understand there will be help at the move-in, but students arriving via plane will have to send most of their stuff ahead, including things that they might need immediately, such as bed linens. How can they get their things? So we're planning to post an update about how and when to quarantine at NEC in the next week, along with housing assignments. I know this is taking a little longer than anticipated, so I do want to thank you for your patience and understanding. If you do want to ship things ahead, items can be delivered to campus and we will bring them up to your rooms. Any packages sent ahead, they just need to have their name on them and the room number in the attention field, and we will get it up to the room from the mailroom. All right, we've got a question. I'm going to direct this to Leah McKinnon-Howe, our Director of Health Services. What else can you share about the quarantine? For example, how would students get exercise?
Well, that's a great question. And I think it probably, many of you may be at home now and not going to the gym because gyms are closed. So it's really about planning ahead. There's lots of great things that you can do in your room by online or with videos. So you can exercise certainly in that way. We're hoping to be able to design some workouts that you can do in your room and share them with you, in addition to having opportunities for group workouts. I know that the RAs and the PALs are putting together lots of fun sorts of activities and competitions for new students and returning students to engage in. So as we think about returning to school, and for those of you that will be in quarantine, routines are important. So hopefully exercise is going to be part of your routine. It's important to note that Massachusetts actually provides the directive for the 2-week quarantine. You do not have to do the 2-week quarantine in your res hall room if you're able to come to Boston sooner than that. As long as you're able to perform a self-quarantine in Massachusetts for 2 weeks, then you're good to go. There are no restrictions on when you choose to do that. Probably one of the safest and smartest things to do is to check the mass.gov website for COVID updates, because they're changing fairly regularly, and we may be in a very different place by the time you're ready to arrive in 3 weeks. So the situation continues to evolve, and we'll continue to push out information as we get it.
Maybe as a follow-up question for you, Leah, can you quarantine outside of Massachusetts?
If you are living in a New England state, New York or New Jersey, you could, because there's no quarantine requirement if you're coming from one of those places. But if you're coming from somewhere other than one of those places, the quarantine does need to occur in Massachusetts.
We've got a question here about what if my son forgets something or they run out of something while they are in quarantine. So one of the things that we're doing in the residence hall floors is that we're adding more vending machines, which will contain sundry items. So we're exploring things like toothpaste and toothbrushes or additional masks so that students can have access to those on the floor. We'll have more information about that coming. Students, of course, are really familiar with online tools such as Amazon, which can be shipped, again, to the conservatory directly. Just make sure in the attention field we have the student's name and the room number once we send those out. And we'll be working with staff at the college to get those packages during quarantine over to the SLPC where the students will be living. Another question here for Leah. I'm wondering about what support NEC will provide students who live off campus if they were to contract COVID-19.
That's a great question, and we do stand ready to assist students who test positive and who need to quarantine at home. The Health and Counseling Service will be checking in with those folks daily and be available for telehealth visits. Will also be available to help to refer to higher levels of care if it's needed and assist with those referrals as appropriate. In terms of like the nuts and bolts of daily living, in terms of food and things like that, there's lots of local services that will deliver groceries and supplies that may be needed during the 2-week period of isolation if somebody tests positive.
Maybe just a follow-up thought for that. You know, in the question about exercise, we talked about preparing ahead and coming up with some plans. This is another great example where students and families can take some proactive steps and explore those online tools like Instacart and Amazon Fresh and Peapod. There are a number of resources around the Boston area, and those extend out to places that students who live off campus, for example, in Jamaica Plain. So I think becoming familiar with those resources so that you're ready to utilize them is time well spent. A question about dining. Do off-campus students have an option to buy limited meals through NEC Dining Hall for convenience? So at this time, dining is going to be limited to the students living on campus, but that could change. As you know, dining in restaurants across Boston and probably in your own hometown, best practices are continuing to evolve. We're going to be testing some new ideas at NEC. And we're excited about those options, pre-ordering ahead, grab-and-go containers. And I would like to think that that can evolve as we learn more and we understand what the demand is from students. So stay tuned for more information on that one as we learn more. All right, some more, looks like we have some more health and safety questions coming in. We'll direct this one back over to Leah. Again, questions about testing. Any updates about testing that you can share?
Yes, we are actually working closely with the Broad Institute in Cambridge, who will be supplying our tests, and we're currently working out the details of where the testing will occur. We have a fairly good sense of the frequency of testing based on the risk of exposure, and that relies largely on where the student is living and the amount of time that they're spending on campus. So we're actually, at this very moment, finalizing the details, and we'll have much more to share next week. So it's a very normal question, obviously a major concern for folks who are coming to Boston, and we know that frequent testing is going to be a cornerstone of identifying infection early, isolating folks who might be infected, supporting them while they're ill so that they can then return to a normal course study.
Leah, another follow-up question. What are the protocols for exposed but asymptomatic students before their test results come back?
Protocol for anybody that has known exposure to a COVID positive person is for that person, when they're asymptomatic, to self-quarantine, and while they're doing that, to do daily temperature checks and also to do daily symptom monitoring, because we know, or at least what we know from the virus at this point, is there's a 2 to 14 day incubation period. So one test may not be, a negative test may not allow us to end the quarantine. The quarantine really goes on during that entire period of possible infectivity, although we will be continuing to test during that time. So if you're exposed to a known positive, you will likely be contacted by the Department of Public Health. We will also perform follow-up. You'll isolate for 2 weeks, self-monitor for symptoms and temperature, and so long as you remain asymptomatic and your tests remain negative after that 2-week period, then you're cleared and good to go.
A question coming through the chat. This one is for Tom. Can you address how the daily 2-hour practice room limits will allow students to maintain a practice regime? especially for students such as percussionists who are particularly reliant on school equipment and facilities?
Right. We are really aware that there are students, particularly, let's say, percussionists, pianists, harpists, et cetera, who really are relying on the instruments that are available in the building. And so the summer practice room guidelines are, they're there because we really are just we just reopened the building a few weeks ago, just starting to get accustomed to having things back in person on campus, on site. So the 2-hour limit really that's the model for the summer. We are looking very thoroughly at what, let's say, for instance, once we know how many percussionists will be in the building or in Boston, how many rooms we have that are safe, and then kind of mapping out the number of hours. Then we'll be able to determine exactly maybe how long they could in one day be allowed to practice. I will say that we are making sure that there'll be a half-an-hour break between each person who does practice, so that there is a chance for the room to kind of the air to filter out and be safe for the person who will be in there following that the one student. But yeah, I know I'm very much aware that 2 hours feels like a very short amount of time for many people, particularly percussionists. And in fact, I've been in touch with several faculty about this. One of the returning students and I have had several exchanges. So we're well aware of the needs and just trying to make sure that what we can provide that is within the safety guidelines.
Thank you, Tom. All right, we had a question in from the chat about whether students in quarantine in the residence halls will be able to order food through DoorDash or other delivery service. The answer to this question is yes. We do have security guards at the entrances of the buildings 24/7, and our dispatch center will be open as well. So if people come later in the evening or after hours, we will have a process set up for those deliveries. We have a question here from a parent who has a dual degree student. We're noting that Tufts, and when they look at other campuses such as Northeastern, that they are seeing different policies about quarantines. Yeah, I wonder if you could clarify some of these differences that we're seeing between the schools.
Oh, I can't really comment on other schools' policies because they're determined internally based on a variety of different factors. Sometimes it has to do with sports teams and what those organizations are recommending. So I do know that we are operating according to the state's guidance, and most schools are going with the state's guidance. The directive, again, to quarantine comes from the state, not from NEC. And just to reiterate, this does not have to be done at NEC. It can be done in one of the New England states, New York or New Jersey. For those that can't come to Boston until it's time to move in, then the quarantine can certainly be done in the res hall. So I guess that's probably the clearest way to say it. Schools will determine their policies internally based on a variety of factors that we're not really privy to.
Here's a follow-up question. I wonder if you could share a little bit about what is happening during the 14-day period for a student.
Sure. What's happening during that time, hopefully most students are going to feel well and be well. And that's going to be a time when students are monitoring for any type of physical symptoms, and they'll be in touch with the Health and Counseling Center staff as needed if they develop symptoms, or if they're just feeling lonely or a little stressed or anxious from being in a quarantine situation. I think it's really wise to prepare before you come about how you want to organize your day. What is your day going to look like? There's lots of ways to reach out and remain connected even when you are quarantined. There'll still be the ability to leave your room. It's not like you're going to be locked in your room. You'll still be able to get out to obviously use the restroom, use the bathroom, to pick up your meals. It just means that you're not going to congregate for long periods of time without a mask in a congested area with other students. So to the extent possible, we're relying on folks to use common sense, to remain in their rooms to the greatest extent possible, and to make good use of that time.
All right, thank you, Lee. And a follow-up question to that, when or how will a student be notified when their quarantine is over?
So again, we're depending on students to monitor their own status, and if you are arriving on, I'll make the math easy, you're coming on the 1st of the month, and 14 days later it's the 15th, and you're feeling well, then you are pretty much done with your quarantine. If at any point during that time you develop symptoms, the expectation is that you will check in with health and counseling, and there'll be an evaluation that will occur, and possibly additional testing to see where you're at, so that we know that you're clear to be released from your quarantine.
I'm going to take a moment here just to take advantage of having Dean Teeters in the room, who supports our international students, and her advising team has been in contact with many of our international students. Again, we know that this has been incredibly challenging for those students. And Rebecca, I wonder if you could share just some very brief updates about the communication that you've had with international students recently.
I'd be happy to. We've seen a lot of changes within the realm of immigration within the past 2 to 3 weeks. And we're doing our best to keep our international students as updated as possible. So definitely make sure you're checking that NEC email, because that's how we're going to communicate any changes that happen. I also want to remind you that the NEC doesn't set immigration rules, that these are set by the government, and we have to follow the government's guidelines on these. But we have received some really good news, so hopefully you've read that. Those of you who are intending to access your education fully online, we don't have to cancel your visas. Everything is really great there. You can maintain your status. For our new students who are still struggling to get a visa, we're still monitoring the embassies, but we have been really heartened to see that some embassies have started to open up over the past 2 weeks. So I encourage you to check out the embassy's website of the embassy that's closest to you to see if it has opened and if you can book an appointment. Because if you can and you can get your visa and join us in Boston, we would really love to have you here physically in person. But if you can't, you can still access your education online. We'll just need to adjust your I-20, and that's something that you want to make sure that you let us know that that's the case for you. Tom Novak spoke about the intent form that people are filling out, letting us know if you're going to be fully online or if you're going to be in person. It's really important that you keep that updated. So if you answered it earlier, you know, like a week ago, but your answer has changed, go ahead and resubmit that form again so that we know. That helps us keep tabs on who's going to be here, who's not, and who we need to work to get a new I-20 if you're a new student. I know you probably have a lot of immigration questions. Remember, you can always reach out to myself or your international advisor, Laura, or Yuki. We're always happy to answer questions. Travel restrictions have been a bit concerning. We are really excited to see that they lifted a lot of those restrictions for F1 students. Right now, those restrictions still remain in place for China, Brazil, and Iran. But beyond that, most of the travel restrictions have ended. Although we saw something come out today about Canada and Mexico coming in from the borders. And so we will look into that a little closer, and we'll send an update to everyone in the next couple days about how that will affect students from Canada and Mexico.
I've got a question here in the chat. If we applied for housing or I'm on the wait list, when will we find out if we have been given space at NEC? As Provost Novak mentioned, we sent out that intent to return or my fall plans survey to try and get the latest update from you about your plans for the fall. And I want to thank everybody that submitted those forms. That has helped us identify students that are planning to return versus those who are planning to stay at home. Again, we know when the housing lottery happened in February, the context was very different and much has changed. And for some of you, it may make more sense to study from home. So we're trying to be as supportive as possible on that front. We're hoping in the next week that we should have all this ironed out. And again, we're really relying on that information that's coming in from you if you're planning to study at home versus planning to travel to Boston so that we can have the cleanest roster possible and get those placements. With that information that we'll do with the housing placements will be information about arriving for quarantine. If you choose to do that at NEC, that option will be spelled out for you on how to do that. So in the next week, we should have that information for you. And again, thank you for your patience and understanding as we're working through all of these moving parts. A follow-up question, when is the deadline to determine online from home versus online in the dorms? So we're really hoping to have that information yesterday about whether you are asking for a waiver from living in the residence hall. So if you have not submitted that information, we would please ask you to do that today so that we can, again, move forward with the housing placements. The more information we have there, the cleaner the process of the placements will be. So thank you for getting that in. And if you haven't, please do so today so that we can act on that information. We have a question about laundry. How will students do laundry when they're in quarantine? So while students are in quarantine, we do have, of course, laundry machines inside the residence hall. What I would recommend is to plan ahead. So to pack an extra pair of sheets and to think about the things that you would be most comfortable wearing during quarantine. While you may not be able to access laundry as you would when you are not in quarantine, that doesn't mean you can't plan ahead and then also be ready to hit the laundromat on the 4th floor of the SLPC when you're ready to go. So as time nears, it appears that all my child's courses, with the exceptions of chorus, are going to be online. I'm truly concerned about the level of education online. Could you comment on the online curriculum? I'll direct this one to Provost Novak.
Thank you. So yes, it is, that is very true that we are, virtually all the academic classes are moving online. And, that is really with, we are very confident that this is going to be a very rich curriculum for your student. The faculty have been working, very hard, learning from this last semester, as well as, kind of modifying things over the summer, getting some training on a learning management system, and then also having access to enhanced technology. So, really are confident that this is going to be a very, again, a very meaningful and rich education, irrespective if it's online or in person. And again, then the performance activity can be more in person, because that's one of the objectives, is to have that opportunity for that performance element in person. So certainly understand the question, but the faculty are working very, very hard to make sure that the curriculum is indeed very rigorous and worthy of an NEC education.
Can I just jump in there also? I think just sort of two things with that. As Provost Novak said, the whole point of moving as much online as we could, the things that we could do online, was to be able to privilege the time in the buildings for performance, the part that we can't do well online. And so that's really the sort of point of that. And then the other piece about really making sure that things are qualitative and really done well online is to make sure that it's consistent for the students who are in person, and the students who are working from Boston and Boston-based, and the students who are working remotely. So we want to make sure that it's a robust experience for everybody. So the faculty are working really hard to really think about their teaching in a different way. So it's a very dynamic experience.
Yeah, thank you both. Question for Provost Novak here. Will performance majors be placed in a chamber music ensemble, or will they have to find their own chamber group like last year?
Right, so I believe there's been information that's been sent to everybody about the chamber music program. It will be slightly different than it has been in years past. So that, for instance, it will be limited in size. They won't. Sometimes we have groups of maybe 6 or 8. For chamber music, it's going to be a little bit smaller this year, of no more than 5. And the idea is that students are welcome to pre-form their own groups. Oftentimes they'll have friends who are attending or maybe have met at a summer festival or something like that. They're more than welcome to do that, or they can apply as individuals. And then the chamber music faculty will take all its information and then eventually confirm which groups will be assigned in chamber music. It's not unusual that we have more applications than we have room for. If there's not room for somebody for this year, never fear. There always will be future opportunities, but that's all going to be determined. So the groups will be formed and announced actually just before the semester begins. Normally that would happen in the first 2 weeks of the semester, but we wanted to make sure that we were maximizing the time in-person time. So you'll have a chance to really hit the ground running when you're here and be able to start coaching and rehearsing as soon as the semester begins. So the chamber music faculty are going to be accelerating that schedule, and I know they're already. I think there's some. There will soon be some forms that can be filled out so you can know how to apply for chamber music.
Thank you, Tom. A question for Leah. What does a protocol look like if someone comes in contact with someone who is COVID positive?
So just to reiterate my previous response, I think I probably already responded to this. If someone comes in contact with someone who's COVID positive, and this means a meaningful contact, meaning you've had more than 15 minutes exposure, less than 6 feet apart without a mask, that's a meaningful exposure. So if you've had that type of an exposure to someone who tests positive, then the protocol at that point would be for you to quarantine for 2 weeks with daily self-monitoring of temperature and symptoms. And we would also be touching base with you from the health center, would be doing daily check-ins to make sure that you're okay. And then during that time, during that 2-week time period, there would be the ongoing COVID testing that we're doing. So you'd be tested during that time frame to probably, depending on if you're a student who lives off campus or if you're living in residence, the time frame would differ. But that's essentially what we would do.
Just to follow up on Leah's point about meaningful contact, one of the things that the city of Boston and I think schools across Boston are hyper-focused on are the common sense best practices that we know will make a difference. So things like physical spacing and wearing a mask, that those will be key measures for our students, our staff, and everyone within Boston to really be adhering to. We know around the country that there's a wide range of standards and rhetoric around whether or not to wear a mask or whether or not to do the physical distancing. The expectation here in Boston at NEC is that everyone will have a mask on and that the physical distancing will be observed. And again, just can't emphasize that enough. We know those things will make a big difference. We know there's a little bit of a learning curve, kind of like the days when people had to start learning to put their seatbelts on when they were in the car. And again, our hope is that when students arrive, that there's some real muscle memory there and students don't even think about it. So thank you in advance for practicing that before you arrive, because we know that's going to make a big difference once you get here.
And also excellent hand hygiene. I know we're going to great pains to make sure that there are many resources throughout campus so people can clean their hands regularly, and also encouraging students not to come to school when they don't feel well. So a very low threshold for maintaining a little bit of social distance and staying away from folks when you're not well to keep the community healthy. And it may be a lower threshold than you would normally have in a COVID world. So, maybe if you have a little bit of a sore throat, you're not going to come to class, and that's okay. Thankfully, we have technology-enabled learning platforms so you can do that and still keep up.
Well, turn to Provost Novak for this one. If we decide to stay at home and do everything online, will we get a refund on our housing fees?
Sorry, I was on mute. My apologies. My apologies. I imagine your question probably is changing your mind between now and the beginning of the semester. And I believe that there is provision for a refund for housing fees. For that, there's I believe a very defined schedule in the academic catalog. But yeah, we know that, we are also continuing to monitor everything about the situation between now and then as well. And I would encourage you just to be, if you're thinking about that, just being in touch with the business office about billing or about the student services and related to anything about the residence hall, so that we can make sure that all the information is really clear.
One thing I do want to share, just on the health and counseling front, whether you're studying at NEC or online, our Health and Counseling Center will be available to students through our telehealth platform. So counseling appointment and health services can both be done through that. I'll just turn to Leah. Is there anything else you want to add about the telehealth platform?
Yes, there is. So depending on where you live, it may make it a little more challenging just because of licensing restrictions for mental health providers and clinicians within the health center. But if you're living anywhere in Massachusetts, in fact, in many states, restrictions have been lifted on clinicians practicing across state lines to increase access during this time of COVID. But if we can't actually treat you and write the prescription or do what you need to have done, we will help you to figure out where you need to be and how you need to get to a place where you can get the care that you require. But we're always going to talk to you no matter what. And we'll have a face-to-face. We've got an effective telehealth platform called DocsMe. So it's very much like what we're doing now. And it's been very effective. Students have found it very effective.
Question for Rebecca. We know a number of our international students have been trying to troubleshoot how to work airplane flights for coming to the United States. Any insight or things that you can share with our international students in flights?
We have found over the past 2 weeks that it's starting to get a little easier to get those flight books because of the slight lifting of the travel restrictions that we're seeing. But I know that the big concern are particularly those coming from China, Brazil, and Iran, where our travel restrictions are still in place. So for right now, until those travel restrictions are lifted, you would need to go to a country without a travel restriction for 14 days before you are permitted to enter the United States. And I know that that is very daunting for many students. And so some of our students have chosen to go the online route because of that. And again, please just let us know if that's what you're going to be doing. But if you are able to travel to another country, we recommend that you make sure you have a visa that you can enter that country as well. You can definitely talk to your international advisor about this. For those of you who are not in those travel restriction countries and you're able to book your flight, just keep in mind that you will still have that 14-day quarantine when you arrive in Boston that you will have to do, and so or the New England area that you'll have to do. So just plan accordingly with that. So if you're off campus, think about when your lease is going to start and how that's going to work in with your travel plans. These are all things that you're going to want to consider as you're booking your flights. But you can always be in contact with us in Student Services. If you have a particular question, we're happy to help.
Thank you, Rebecca. So we've got a question in the chat about move-in days and times and how that will work. So the process for that, once Stephen Sweat emails out, he's our Director of Residence Life, the room assignments, what he will be doing is assigning a day and a time for moving in. We're shooting to move in approximately 40 students per day so that we can space people out. And that way we prevent the likelihood of a log jam at the door, right? So part of what we want to do is when you arrive on campus, to feel like you've got time to go through those stations and to get up to your room comfortably and settled in before someone else is coming in right behind you. Just to echo what Provost Novak and Dean Teeters said earlier, please be in touch with Stephen Sweat if you have not already informed him about your plans for the fall and housing and whether you're seeking a waiver. We really need that information to get those room placements done. And then the follow-up piece, once we're able to do that, is we'll be able to do the quarantine opportunity for those of you that would like to come early. And we'll also be able to assign the window when you will arrive. So again, our Director of Residence Life, Student Sweat will be organizing that information. And what we need from you most at this point is just understanding where you are with your housing plan. And just looking at some of the chat questions that are coming in here. So will students be permitted to travel home or will parents be able to visit their students between the start of school and Thanksgiving break? I'll turn to Leah on this one about advice for traveling home and visitors coming in town.
So I think it probably, again, common sense is going to come in here. I think it depends on where you're traveling from and what the COVID activity is in the area that you're living in. So if you're living in Arizona, where there's a lot of infection, you may want to think twice about coming to Massachusetts because you're going to have to quarantine anyway. So I think probably, again, it's really going to depend on what the state looks like at that point in time. If you live within the region, if you live within New England, if you have family members who are in New England or in Massachusetts, it may be appropriate to plan a visit there with them in their place of residence. That might be a reasonable thing to do. Again, I think anything that you can do to minimize risk of exposure by like getting on an airplane or anything like that is probably the safest thing to do. And again, the Massachusetts.gov COVID web page has updated information about travel recommendations, restrictions, etc.
A couple of questions about the Revolution Hotel. One of them was, can you describe the security at the Revolution Hotel since we will not be potentially in the SLPC at NEC? So the front desk of the Revolution Hotel is staffed 24/7. So there's always someone at the door greeting people as they come in, and they will be aware of NEC's policies. The elevator to get up to the residence hall rooms is this very similar to what you see in the SLPC, where you need a key fob to actually get up to certain floors. So the NEC floors will be restricted to NEC students. There will not be guests on those floors. Another Revolution Hotel question, will students in the hotel need to supply their own linens and pillows and towels? Yes, students will need to bring their own linens, just as they would for the SLPC. Going back to a question earlier about laundry, there are a number of laundry options at the Revolution Hotel. That includes an in-service option if you'd like to have laundry pickup and drop off from the room. There are also a number of laundry mats in the area immediately around the Revolution Hotel. Another question from the chat. Since singing seems to be one of the ways the virus has been spread, what precautions will NEC be taking for their singers and those who perform with them? Maybe this is a good question for Leah and Tom. I'll let you talk about.
Maybe I'll start, Leah. So it's a very valid question, and it's something that we have been actually giving a lot of thought to. So a couple of things that are in play right now is that so one very it's a small example, but we sometimes have had chamber music with singers, and given the this concern about close proximity with singers, that actually is not going to be allowed this coming year. We've decided to just suspend that for the year. In addition, we know that proper distancing is going to be very, very important. So right now, our kind of guideline is 16 feet between people who are singing, or between an individual and a singer. So it's quite a bit of distance, but it's just very important that we keep that kind of distance. And there would be some plexiglass, clear plexiglass stands between the two individuals as well. And things like for the opera department, we're not going to have a kind of a traditional, kind of opera scenes with 5 or 6 people, or even a main stage production this semester. It's going to be very much focused on the individual, and there'll be a chance to really fine tune your skills on arias, on some monologue and kind of acting skills, really some very specific curricula that already the faculty are in the throes of planning that I think can be really effective and provide a very kind of focused experience for individual singers. And I would say also just continuing to monitor, best practices around the country and with our peers to make sure that we are really up to speed on the latest information that's being released on singing specifically. So Lee, you want anything to add to that?
Sure. There are a number of companies who are producing masks made specifically for singers that provide a little more room so that when the singer inhales, the cloth isn't being sucked up against the mouth, but they can actually sing quite comfortably. We're also following a study out of the University of Colorado Boulder that's looking at aerosolization among musicians, not just vocalists, but instrumentalists as well. And they should have some data at the end of this month that deals directly with singers. So a lot of institutions are looking to that evidence to guide decision-making around distancing. The other thing that we're really mindful of is the amount of time that singers are spending in a rehearsal space, because it's also the intensity of the exposure, not just the closeness. So limiting the amount of time in the rehearsal space with adequate time between uses of that hall to air out the room, to allow for multiple exchanges of air. I know our environmental control people are looking at putting in UVC lights and also potential HEPA filters in some areas to make sure that the air exchange is also being enhanced as much as possible. So it's all of those environmental controls in concert with the kind of curricular things that Tom referred to.
One other thing I'll mention as well is that we're very fortunate to have a faculty member who is very talented when it comes to certain technologies, and looking at the possibility of having a pianist in one room and a singer in a nearby room, and be able to really actively engage together without any kind of latency issues or lag issues, that kind of thing. And that's been a really exciting development as we're in this particular kind of in these kinds of circumstances. So again, we're really trying to make sure that we're taking any and all precautions.
Got a health center question from the Q&A here. I'll direct this one over to Leah. For our students who are studying online, either here in the US or if they're an international student, could you tell us a little bit more about how they might book an appointment and what that looks like?
Sure. You would call the health service number. Monica, our office coordinator, would schedule an appointment for you. And then once you schedule your appointment, the clinician who would be seeing you would send you a DoxyMe link with an invitation to join them at the time of your appointment. And then basically the clinician would activate, you'd hit the link at the designated time, and the person would admit you into their exam room, and you would virtually be admitted to the room, and then you would have a conversation. You'd actually have a modified exam that, believe it or not, can be fairly effective through a telehealth platform, and then would figure out what the issue was, come up with a plan of care, and if it were apparent that your need could not be met in a telehealth visit, you'd be advised about how to access care that would be appropriate to manage the problem that you were having.
Thank you, Leah. And maybe a follow-up question about health insurance waivers. Who do they contact for a waiver if they'll be studying from home? And do you have any additional thoughts about health insurance if the student is opting to study online?
So if you're opting to study online and you're not coming to Massachusetts and you're insured through your parent or through someone, then you don't need the student health insurance plan. You certainly don't need the school health insurance. If you are in Massachusetts and your plan is not a Massachusetts-based plan, or you're an international student and you don't have sufficient coverage, then I would encourage you to get the student health insurance plan, because it's going to give you really expansive coverage while you're in Massachusetts or Boston. You can also take a look and compare the benefits in both plans. And if you don't have a really great plan in the state that you're in, you may actually opt to purchase the student health insurance plan, because it's good in states across the United States. It's not something that is going to probably be optimal for someone who's living internationally. So those of you who are living in other countries and not able to join us until next semester or whenever, it's not likely that you will need to purchase a student health insurance plan.
Just jump in on that one. Just everyone will be enrolled in that. So if you are not going to opt in for the health insurance plan, you do actually need to submit the waiver. And you can do that through the health center's page on our website. It links you right to Gallagher, who's our provider for health insurance, and it talks you through how you can submit that waiver.
Yeah, do you have to be on the student health insurance plan to utilize health services at NEC?
No, you don't have to be on the student health insurance plan. We're here for everybody, regardless of your insurance type.
This question for President Kalin. What is our plan for the spring?
Gee, I wish I knew. Not to be quippy, I think we're all chomping at the bit, and I would love to make all kinds of lofty promises about the spring. But as I keep saying, the thing that I have learned in COVID is humility more than anything, and we just don't know yet. Again, our primary concern is safety and being able to provide an amazing education within a safe context. So we just, 4 months is a long time in the time of COVID, and so we are just watching things closely. I think we all in our optimistic moments listen to things about new testing and people wearing their masks and hoping that we can help the curve of this, not to mention things as lofty as vaccines and treatments. But the truth is we just have to keep an eye on this for a while. So we will be in touch, in sort of constant touch, as plans develop. But right now we just need a little bit more time to know what is even remotely realistic at this point. So sorry, but you'll have to stay tuned on that.
This next question, maybe I can answer with some help from Rebecca and Leah. Could you tell us more about what move-in day might look like? So I'll just open, the way this would work, we would schedule your arrival day and time, and we would like you to arrive as close to that as possible. So then again, we can have people spaced out when they first arrive on campus. We're then looking at a testing station where we would do an initial test for COVID when you first arrive. And then our staff would take care of a couple logistics like getting you your ID card and moving you from the testing station over to the SLPC, where we'll have some staff available to help move your student up to the residence hall floors. At that point, we would be asking for you to stay outside of the SLPC. Again, we're treating the SLPC like a household, and we're really trying to control who's inside and trying to limit the likelihood that we introduce COVID into our household, into our home. If a student forgot something, my recommendation would be to, as a parent, maybe to be hovering around so that you might be able to make a quick trip to CVS. And again, we'll have some staff there that can help bring things upstairs. Thinking ahead with your student about ways they might share how they're setting up their room through FaceTime or Zoom or Teams, some of those tools, so that you can have that interactive experience of moving into the room, something that we know is really important and is really sort of a magical period in time. And we know that's hard as parents. So again, thinking a little bit ahead about with how this can work with your student, I think there's a way to, again, have that in-person virtual experience where you get to experience the move-in and also be there to offer some support. I'll look to Leah and Rebecca if anything I missed there.
One thing I might add, just to kind of help the process, we will be checking for new students that they have met their immunization requirements and that they've submitted their health report at that initial check-in. So for everyone, if you can please get those turned in as soon as possible, that will help speed the process along the day of, and we'll have less hangups. as we're initially checking you in. And if you have questions about that, again, it's all on the Health Center page. You can also email our Health Center, and Monica will respond to you about those questions. Leah, do you want to talk about kind of what the screening might look like?
Yes, so what will happen is you'll have an infrared temperature scan. We'll do a symptom check. We're hoping to be able to roll out to you before you arrive an app that you will become familiar with that will serve as a symptom checker. We will then get you through a testing station to have a nasal swab, and then you'll go on your way. For those of you who have not met the immunization requirements, and it's a vaccine that we provide at the health center, which is pretty much all of them except for chickenpox vaccination, because it's a live vaccine and we don't carry it. We will update your measles, we'll update your tetanus, your hepatitis, whatever you happen to need. We'll do that at some point during that day. We'll be referred over to the health center. So that's what that will look like.
So we're coming up on an hour. Just to look over to my panelists to see if there were any other closing questions or thoughts, things that we didn't get a chance to touch on. All right. Well, thank you again for joining us this evening. Be safe. We're thinking about you. Don't forget to fill out that intent form if you have not done so already. Following up on Leah's advice, prepare ahead, plan ahead, and think about your options. If you're an international student, please be in touch with our advisors. If you have any questions or experiencing any challenge, and we'll be there to help and talk you through things. We are planning for another community update next week, so keep an eye out for that communication through the all student email or the parent email. And again, we'll be posting this video on the Resource Center webpage. So thank you all, and have a great night.